So Ed, thanks so much for joining us.
Eric, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about what Trust Exchange does and what you guys focus on.
So Trust Exchange is a sort of B2B social network. And our goal is to help businesses that need to work with other businesses exchange information more effectively.
Okay.
So customers, vendors, partners, and we provide a platform where, let's say you're a bank and you need information on your partners or your vendors. The bank can go in and set the criteria, and then if you're that partner or vendor or customer, you could submit it to them securely, and it works like a social network. So if you're a vendor and you have 100 banks as your customer, you put one event out and they all get a copy of it. So that event might be an audit or an insurance policy, et cetera.
Okay. And so if I'm a bank looking for someone to come in and do an audit, is that what you're saying? Is that somebody who would be providing a service to me?
So no. So let's say you're a bank and you have a vendor that manages your credit card processing.
Okay. Yep.
Because of the regulatory environment that banks are in, they're required to monitor you for the life of the contract. They can't just go in, sign the contract, do due diligence, and hope that you're going to be an adequate vendor. So they're responsible to make sure that you're safe, you're certified, you won't get breached, that you follow best practices, so on and so forth. And it's very time consuming. And by the way, this banking example also applies to pharma, healthcare,
right.
even small businesses. We have 20,000 users on our system that might use it for project management to look at who are the people that are involved in getting the project complete.
Right. Yeah, and I see that. I think about like in some of the government work I've done, there's certain things that you have to keep, make sure stays up to date, and all those things are working in order to keep a contractor to be considered for one. How did you get into this? I mean, because I think when people think about checking a business out, maybe their first thought is, I might go get their Better Business Bureau, ranking. What does that look like? But that isn't always appropriate in the B2B space. It seems a little bit harder to attack there.
Yeah. So you're exactly correct. So how I came up with the idea is my prior company, which is still, I'm on the board there. I stepped down as CEO a bunch of years ago, but we raised about $100 million. And while we were in the startup phase there, we ended up getting a fairly large deal. It was actually with Disney Corporation. And they checked our Dun & Bradstreet profile. They checked our credit. And it was 5 years old. It said we had no employees when we had about 50 employees, no revenue when we were doing about 3 million in revenue. This error after error after error. And I tried to get it fixed in time for Disney to use it, but so they charged me $700 to fix my profile, and then didn't do it. So out of that frustration, I started thinking about the problem. Disney really doesn't care whether or not I paid my phone bill. What they care about is whether or not my company is safe and secure and can handle the data that they wanted us to handle.
Right.
And even looking at my credit report isn't going to answer those questions for them. So that's what gave me the idea. And not just check it, but how often should they be monitoring it?
Yeah.
If I sign a 3-year contract with them and they check it at day 1 of year 1, I may have a fault a month in or a week in that they wouldn't have been aware of. So that's kind of my background is engineering. So it's like the engineering aspect of, okay, I want to monitor this over time, not just check it. And it turns out that idea plays out in multiple industries for multiple things. I mean, you may think of examples in your own life, in your own business, and how here's this important vendor of mine. Hey, here's Skype. Is Skype working today? Is it working tomorrow? Is it going to work an hour from now? How frequently do you need to check those things to have a comfort level with your business?
Yeah. And that's within the business world. You establish your business and it has its own entity, but it takes such a long time to get something in place, and it's still about the owners, and it's all tied into their personal credit. And I've been down that D&B path before, and that never made sense to me, never worked the way that I expected or thought it would.
And that the D&B report certainly has value, right? But in the instance that I described earlier, where you're doing a specific function for me, and that function may be handling credit cards for my business, or cleaning my office. If I have sensitive material inside of my office and you're cleaning my office, I need to make sure that all of your employees are background checked and safe and secure, and that you're insured in case one of those employees gets hurt on my premise. So there's a whole series of things. And while, the existing business information bureaus provide a good service, it's incomplete in the fact that they may tell you whether or not you paid your utility bill or I paid my telecom bill, but it's not going to tell you whether or not I'm certified to handle credit cards or if my penetration testing from this network provider passed or failed.
And so talk to me about what that looks like, because I'm curious. It feels like there's a lot of different players unless it may be self-reported. So how does that work out?
So from our user perspective, it kind of is like Facebook for business, right? Okay. So if I'm going to track a whole bunch of other businesses, I'm a bank or I'm a hospital or whatever, I may be tracking a bunch of businesses, my customers, my vendors, my partners. And similar to Facebook, if you and I go and check into a restaurant, all of my friends would see it and all of your friends would see it. Except in our context, they're business events. So, hey, I just got my new cyber insurance policy, and that would be broadcast out to everyone that's following me. And the people that are interested in that can go into that event, dig a little deeper. Like they'd say, oh, Ed and Eric were at this restaurant having dinner. Who else was with them? Oh, we see that, Isaac was with us.
Right.
So what are the details of that event? And then even the document itself. So we also have like a whole kind of secure document management piece.
So it's kind of self-reported, but it has third-party verification of some sort behind it.
Self-reported, third-party verified. And then our data sources may also be, external. Like for instance, we have a client where we scan the Department of Transportation. They're a logistics company, and they haul hazardous materials around the country for their customers. And they have to make sure that their vendors in turn are safe and secure and insured. So we go out and those events we happen to be getting from the Department of Transportation.
Yeah. Okay.
So we can pull events from anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. And so this sounds like a simple but also difficult problem to solve.
It is. It's an interesting problem because it's an exponential problem. Right. Well, even if there's two businesses, the number of interactions and transactions grows pretty rapidly, especially in industries where there's a high compliance bar: finance, healthcare, pharma, municipalities, schools, etc. So we have fire protection that they used our system as well to manage the fire protection inspections in different communities.
Yeah.
Nursing homes and schools and hospitals. So we built it so it has a lot of common denominators, and that our partners can build this cool functionality on top of it that's industry specific.
Yeah. And so as you start to put it together and solution through it, because you've done several things before, so what has helped you in this case? Like what's new? Like what are you learning along the way on this one?
So it's interesting. I actually did this specific exercise comparing my prior two businesses. So business one, I sold in 2000 for $400 million. And the amount of money it took me to, one of the bars I use is what do you need to get to $1 million in revenue? What do you need to get to kind of traction?
Right.
And with the first company, it was about $14 million that we had raised of infrastructure, servers, people, engineers to create that business and get it to the point where we could begin selling it and get to $1 million in revenue. Business number two, Aria Systems, which is still a going concern, it was a similar amount of money to get to that point. Subsequently, we've raised over 100 to get to where we are to scale it. But to get to that first milestone of can you at least show to an investor or to a partner that you're ready to drive $1 million in revenue, that was about half. So it was about $7 million.
Yeah.
And Aria was software as a service. The first business also was software out in the internet, but it wasn't quite software as a service. We had to own our servers. We had to own our connectivity.
Right.
With Aria, we had to own our servers and we rented our connectivity. So there was the types and numbers of engineers had decreased. So here's Trust Exchange. We're on AWS. We're in the cloud. I don't need security engineers. I don't need network engineers. I don't need hardware engineers. I need software developers and sales and marketing.
Right.
So the amount of capital that you need to expend today versus 10 years ago or 15 years ago is greatly reduced. And the ability to scale on that cost infrastructure is much, there's much less friction.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is an interesting thinking about that because I've done startups, I think, over a similar time span than you have. And I shared the story even just on the last show. I was working with a company that needed to put an inventory management system in place, a relatively complex one. I think the licensing agreement for them for the year was going to be $12,000. And they were balking at that. They're like, oh, that's $12,000. I said, I think we spent a couple $1 million building a similar system just about 10 years ago. So I would sign that today. That'd be a much easier thing. So I'm going to go to a commercial break, and when we get back, I want to talk a little bit about sort of things that you're learning. What came first? Like, did you have to bring the business on or go find the sources of verifying them? You know, there's you kind of multi-legged stool here, you know, of how you take this to market and kind of what that looks like. So we're talking today with Edward Sullivan. He is the CEO of Trust Exchange. You're listening to Build Your Best Business, and we will be back in just a minute.
So tell me how you came up with the name Laddering Works.
So it's tied into several things. It has several meanings. So Laddering is the name of the book that I had that came out in 2013, and I'm working on 2 more books in that series. So the first book was about how to find customers and how to create marketing messages. I'm working on one around building teams and then also being a good leader. So how do you run your business effectively, those kind of things.
Nice.
In that book, I teach you that you need to understand why. And we need to understand why very deeply. So you're asking that question multiple times to understand what your customer wants and how they're buying from you. So with laddering, we're helping you scale up. So we're laddering your company up to the next level by deeply understanding what's not working in the company. So what operational structures are missing? What are you not doing on the marketing side? And so we apply the techniques that I talk about in that book, and we ladder your company up. And the interesting thing about laddering is you think about moving up. Well, we actually have to go deep. We have to look up underneath the covers. We have to understand why the structure is not there before we can take you up to that next level. So it plays off a couple of ways, but it's based on that technique. And we're back. You're listening to Build Your Best Business. I'm your host, Eric Holtzclaw. Today we're talking with Edward Sullivan. He is the CEO of Trust Exchange, a very interesting sort of way of allowing B2B customers to confirm each other and make sure that they've got all the compliance things in place they need to do business. And that is a big thing. Specifically, you've got some real legislation coming down that, GDPR, some of those kind of things that really are going to impact the way that we're supposed to share data, communicate data, know what people are doing or not doing with customer data. One of the people I'm interviewing in a couple of weeks is just even talking about how you're managing and monitoring your employee workforce so that things are, that those things are in place. Because we do so much outsourcing nowadays. Companies are these kind of loose-knit groups of companies kind of doing things together versus it being underneath one umbrella. So as you think about the problem, what did you go after first? Did you go after businesses that needed to verify each other? Did you look for the data sources? Like, what was your first build?
So we went after the businesses first, and I try to follow a process that I learned multiple years ago. There's a book called 4 Steps to the Epiphany. Okay. And I know a lot of people, when they're building a product, focus on the product and then try to go to market. The theory behind this book is focus on the customer. It's customer development, not product development.
Right.
So, that's a simplification of it. But basically, build the product, get it out there with some early users, observe how they use it, improve the product, and then try to create an enterprise version or a more robust go-to-market version. So that's the process that I followed at my prior businesses, also the process we followed here at Trust Exchange. Well, we launched kind of what we called the minimum viable product, engaged a lot of CFO types, project managers, chief risk officers to try to understand what are the things that they needed. And, I guess there's a lot of standards that are out there. It's going to be interesting with these new regulations coming down. Like the regulators will put out a standard that might be like, for instance, one of the standards in banking is this 1,000-line checklist that they make any vendor fill out.
Right.
And I was talking to a CEO of a bank who is a small local bank in New York, Troy, New York, and they're passionate about using local vendors. So for web development, anybody that they can use in their own community, they try to use those vendors. And he was giving me an example of their website. They wanted to have their website refreshed, not a complete back end, but just the look and feel.
Update, yeah.
Yeah, they figured it would cost about $10,000 or $15,000. But in order to do the due diligence on that vendor, it would be $25,000 of their internal costs just to do this.
Just to make a selection. Oh, wow.
Right. To do a $15,000 deal. So it's an interesting trade-off in the regulatory burden, especially for these smaller businesses, and the burden that bank would be putting on that small business. Hey, we need you to go get a full financial audit, which might be $50,000.
Right.
We need you to go get a SOC 3 on your back end. So one of the things that we focus on is, okay, we understand that that's what the standard is. The standard is go get a SOC 3. But what are the things, like if you look at a SOC 3 is a point in time, right? It's, January 1st to December 31st of last year. And the 2017 SOC 3s, you may get it in April or May.
Right.
So it's historical. It's archaeology, in fact, right? So, but you're managing my credit cards now. You're managing this process for me now. What are the things that are probably more critical that I should be looking at a higher frequency? And would that give me a better or deeper understanding of what your business is doing? So one of the things we try to focus on are things like depth and frequency that are different than some of these standards that are overly burdensome.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So little slices of time that may indicate something versus like that kind of historical. And I agree. Things could look great. It's sort of the weird system we have in place for almost everything, mortgages, all that. It's all this kind of historical look back and then, I can get the mortgage today, but I'm going to get fired in 2 weeks. Right.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So doing that minimal viable product, were you building like prototypes and letting people play with them, or is it paper, or talking about the concept?
So it was basically the conversations at first.
Yeah.
And we just kind of whiteboarded, or at least virtually whiteboarded, what we thought it would look like, we picked out a couple key end user types. And we just kind of imagined what their workflow would be, and then made some presentations. Hey, we understand that you have this challenge. Wouldn't it be good if you could do it this way or that way, or C, rather than managing 100% of your problem, if you could manage by exceptions, would that be useful?
Yeah.
And then just kind of we evolved to the platform we are today through those iterative conversations that we had with, some key advisors in different industries. And then as we got out there, we were able to see how people are using the product.
Right.
In my prior company, Aria, and it's actually not my prior company. It's my other existing company.
Right.
We had a lot of early customers that were in the gaming space. So I became fascinated with gamification and trying to understand how do users interact with the different interfaces and what do they do and what drives behavior. So we built a lot of those things in to track engagement.
Okay.
Like, if you think about a game, you want to go kill this little monster when you're a little character, but now you're going after the big dragon when you're, a powerful character. Same kind of thing in our system. Like, what are the little tasks that you can do when you first jump into our platform, our world? And if you think of all software like that, it's kind of interesting, right? Like, okay, hey, I'm trying out this new piece of software on the web or whatever it is. What are the first things I can do? What are the first problems I can solve? how many clicks do I have to get, do I need to, before I get to fun, right?
Yeah, right.
And that's how we kind of approach the design of our software and the usability of it.
And that's part of what I've written about this a couple times with kind of a misunderstanding of, and I'm going to use the word millennial, but it's like the knowledge workforce. They are used to playing games, or like goals. So building things that way, so they understand the purpose behind what they're doing. It's not that they don't want to do it. They just want to know, what does this do? Like, how does this get me somewhere, versus it just being a rote task. If you watch the show Lost, where they had to push the red button, but nobody knew what happened if you didn't push the red button, right? Like that kind of model, and thinking about that from a user perspective, and it incents them to continue to play and use the system in a way that you want them to. So other than being user focused, which sounds like something that you would advocate, what are some other things if somebody came to you and said, hey, I'm thinking of building something similar to what you're doing from the perspective of like an exchange or whatever? What's some advice you would give them? Because you've done this, you've been successful, right? I mean, you've sold these kind of businesses, or sold businesses before. You know what works and what doesn't work. What's your one piece of sage advice?
I would say that kind of the first step, even before going down the path of building a minimum product and talking to people, is a lot of entrepreneurs have many ideas, not just one. And some may just have one, unique, singular idea. But how do you pick? If you have 3 or 4 ideas, how do you pick, and how do you evaluate which ideas you may want to go with? And I think going through that process is also a pretty it's challenging, but it's very valuable to understand. Okay, what are my goals? Do I need this? Is my goal just to replace my income from an $80,000 a year job or a $50,000 a year job, or is it I want to go be $1 billion company, or the hundreds and hundreds of things in between those two endpoints?
Right.
So trying to understand what is it that your goal is, what is it that you want, and then deconstructing it and saying, okay, what are my chances of generating enough income to support me and my family, et cetera? Or what are my chances of going in and building a venture funded big software company, or a big product company, or a big services company, whatever it may be. So I think that's actually kind of the step prior to going out and building the minimum viable product is if you have multiple ideas, how to really systematize thinking about them and making sure that they meet up with your goals, right?
Yeah, starting with the end in mind. And that's a lot of the companies I work with, that's the biggest issue, is they have no idea why they started it. Like, they know what they started. It felt very much like dating without realizing they were going to get married, or that they were going to have to, you are picking up a puppy dog and like, oh my gosh, I now have it for 18 years. Like what do I do with it now? And that is missed. It's sort of honeymoon-like, or dating, and then now where are you going with it? And do you even know what that is? So, yeah, very, very interesting. Very good advice. And something that I see some of us who've done this a time or two is one of the things we point out is like, my analogy with that is that you and I might want to go skiing, but you're thinking of snow skiing and I'm thinking of water skiing, and we haven't decided on what that is.
Yeah, and I show up with a bathing suit, and you have your snow gear.
Yeah, right. And we get in the car and we're like, wait a second, I thought we were going skiing. We are, just a completely different end goal in mind. So as you think about the future for Trust Exchange or yourself, I mean, you've done several businesses. What's next?
So one of the things I focus on, there's certainly goals, sales goals, got to meet the revenue, got to do this, got to get the product, get the customers. But I also often think about who is the next key person that we want to bring onto the team. Is it, I really need somebody to come in and get our messaging to be more clear, or I need, one of the things we're evaluating right now is blockchain, and how does blockchain and the technologies around blockchain fit into this world of trust and reputation between businesses. And, that's a whole nother kind of set of expertise that you need, right? So do we want a person like that, or do we need a CFO, right? Now that we're getting customers and getting some revenue traction, getting somebody that could, I spent too many hours in the past 2 weeks dealing with setting up payments in my bank account and the QuickBooks, and that's the kind of thing that is very frustrating. but it needs to be done right the first couple of times you do it, right? And then you can take your system and get somebody to do it. So it's, thinking about like if I have a limited amount of resources and I can afford to hire one person, who is that next hire?
Yeah, what's that next best hire? And talking about blockchain, because I've talked with several companies and individuals about that, your system seems, from my understanding of blockchain and how it works, it would be a really good application for it, because it's that trusted piece of data that only one person has, those kind of things.
Yeah.
That would make a lot of sense, because that was verified. That's a good application.
So in my studies of blockchain, and I would say that I'm not all the way up on the learning curve. I'm still I'm so on the steep part of the learning curve still.
Right.
So it seems to me that there's a couple of very specific use cases where blockchain technologies are effective. One of them is certainly where the information needs to be secure and needs to be verified. And then the other is if you are dependent on a trusted third party to give you information about something. Banks, for instance, are the trusted third party around financial transactions, and they manage the middle part of a two-party transaction or a multiple-party transaction. And Bitcoin, which is one of the first blockchain applications, eliminates the need for all of those trusted third parties.
Right.
In trust exchange context, there's multiple trusted third parties for business information, either divided by geographic region or divided by industry type, et cetera. So
service being provided, things like that, I could see that too.
Yeah, exactly. So for in our context, we think that there's certainly value to decentralizing. So our goal is to, right now, without blockchain technology, our goal is to disrupt the business information market by allowing companies to go direct to each other. So we want to be like the Airbnb of business information or the Waze of business information, right? Where I'm not looking at this weird stuff that happened in the past. I can tell where the police are right now. I don't need to analyze last year's tickets with the best computers and most expensive algorithms to figure out where the police are on the road. Right. I'm just going to ask the people sitting in front of that corner or that intersection, hey, is there an accident there? Is there traffic there, et cetera? So that's where we want to be. What blockchain does, it's a force multiplier for us and enabling us not just to understand the timeliness of that information, but be able to share it and decentralize it.
Yeah, very nice. Yeah, I could totally see that working there. Well, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. It's been great hearing about Trust Exchange. We'll keep up with what you do in the future.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure, and it's exciting. I'm passionate about entrepreneurship, and while I don't have it completely figured out, always willing to help other people with questions who are on the journey.
Well, and for me, that's what's fun about it. It's always a puzzle. You're always you've never really figured it out. So thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Eric Holtzclaw. You've been listening to Build Your Best Business. We've been talking today with Ed Sullivan. He's the CEO of Trust Exchange. All of his information will be in our show notes and also in the information that's uploaded to the podcast platforms. Until next time, what are you going to do to build your best business?